Greenland is not where you think it is. And that single fact, that quiet, cartographic lie you've been fed since the first day you sat in a geography class, might be the most consequential deception of the 21st century. Because right now, as you read the headlines about rising tensions between superpowers, military buildups in the Pacific, and diplomatic crises in Eastern Europe, the place where World War III would actually begin is somewhere most people couldn't locate on a map without laughing. A frozen island the size of a continent, mostly ignored, occasionally mocked, perpetually misunderstood. And in a moment, you'll see exactly why military strategists lose sleep over it. Let's start with what you think you know. Greenland is big, cold, remote, and basically irrelevant to global affairs. Maybe you've heard that Donald Trump wanted to buy it. Maybe you laughed at that. Here's the thing. The people who didn't laugh were in Beijing, Moscow, and the Pentagon. Because they already knew what the rest of the world was only beginning to realize, Greenland isn't just a frozen rock in the North Atlantic. It is the geographic center of the most dangerous military chessboard on the planet. Here's the problem. Most people have spent their entire lives looking at maps that fundamentally distort reality. The Mercator projection, the flat map you grew up with, the one still hanging in millions of classrooms, stretches the poles to infinity to preserve the shapes of land masses. The result is that Greenland appears roughly the same size as Africa. In reality, Africa is about 14 times larger. But the distortion does something even more disorienting than that. It bends the perception of distance. On a Mercator map, flying from New York to Moscow looks like a long eastward journey across the Atlantic and Europe. Pull out a globe, or look at a polar azimuthal projection, and something insane happens. The shortest route between those two cities passes almost directly over Greenland's ice sheet. Every intercontinental ballistic missile, every long-range bomber, every hypersonic glide vehicle traveling between North America and Eurasia takes a path that cuts through Arctic airspace. Greenland sits at the throat of that corridor. This is why it matters. And this is only the beginning of why it gets much, much more complicated. If you enjoy these deep dives into maps and hidden geography, consider subscribing. There's a lot more of this coming. During the Cold War, the United States military understood Arctic geography in a way that the general public simply did not. Starting in the 1950s, American forces built a network of radar installations across Greenland and the broader Arctic under the Distant Early Warning Line, the DEW line, designed to detect Soviet bombers and missiles coming over the pole. Thule Air Base, located in northwestern Greenland just above the 76th parallel, became one of the most strategically critical military installations on the planet. It housed nuclear weapons. It tracked Soviet satellites. It monitored missile launches. And it did all of this from a location so remote, so brutally cold, and so geographically essential that both superpowers quietly acknowledged it was irreplaceable. In a moment, you'll understand why that base is now more relevant than it has been in 40 years, and why its future might be decided without Denmark's input at all. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Greenland is technically an autonomous territory of Denmark. A small Nordic country of roughly 6 million people technically controls the land that anchors America's entire Arctic defense posture. Danish sovereignty over Greenland is recognized internationally. And yet, the United States has maintained a continuous military presence on the island since World War II, operating under a series of defense agreements that grant Washington extraordinary access. Some analysts describe it as a situation without a clean parallel in modern geopolitics. A European democracy holds nominal sovereignty over territory that functions, in practice, as an American strategic asset. And now a third player has entered the room. China's interest in Greenland has accelerated dramatically over the past decade. Chinese state-connected companies have submitted bids to build airports in Greenland, establish research stations near the island's southern coast, and invest in the extraction of rare earth minerals buried beneath the receding ice. Those mineral deposits are not a minor footnote. Geological surveys suggest Greenland may hold some of the world's largest untapped reserves of rare earth elements, the materials that go into every electric vehicle battery, every advanced military sensor system, every smartphone and satellite component manufactured on Earth. The country or coalition that controls reliable access to those deposits holds enormous leverage over the global technology supply chain for decades to come. China currently processes roughly 80% of the world's rare earth supply. Greenland represents a potential rebalancing of that equation, or, if Beijing gets there first, an entrenchment of it. And here's the part people miss. Every airport, every port, every infrastructure project in Greenland is also potential dual-use military infrastructure. This is not speculation. It is the explicit concern documented in multiple NATO intelligence assessments. Russia, meanwhile, has been doing something that receives almost no attention in Western media. Over the past 15 years, Moscow has dramatically expanded its Arctic military footprint. Russia has reopened Soviet-era bases across its Arctic coastline, deployed new classes of nuclear-powered submarines specifically designed for under-ice operations, and established new air defense systems capable of tracking targets across the polar region. Russian military doctrine has increasingly framed the Arctic not as a remote periphery, but as a primary theater of strategic competition. The Northern Sea Route, the shipping lane that runs along Russia's Arctic coast and is becoming navigable for longer periods each year as sea ice retreats, is now explicitly described in Russian strategic documents as a vital national interest to be defended with military force if necessary. Greenland's eastern coastline faces this route directly. Any disruption to maritime traffic through those waters would immediately involve Greenland's geography, whether Nuuk wants it to or not. And now for the plot twist that changes everything. Greenland itself has been moving, slowly and unmistakably, toward independence. The island's government, the Naalakkersuisut, has increasingly asserted its desire for full sovereignty from Denmark. The majority of Greenland's population of roughly 57,000 people, predominantly Inuit, identifies more strongly with a distinct Greenlandic national identity than with Danish citizenship. Independence referendums have been discussed. The legal frameworks for separation have been studied. And here is the extraordinary geopolitical wrinkle that almost nobody is talking about. If Greenland declares independence, the defense treaties that allow the United States to operate Thule Air Base, now officially renamed Patuxent Space Base, would need to be renegotiated entirely. A newly independent Greenland would suddenly find itself sitting at the table with Washington, Moscow, and Beijing all simultaneously offering deals, investments, security guarantees, and economic partnerships. A population smaller than a mid-sized American city would become one of the most courted diplomatic actors on the planet. And the outcome of those negotiations would directly shape the balance of power in the Arctic for the rest of this century. Here's the myth that needs to be dismantled. People hear Arctic conflict, and they imagine a frozen, distant scenario that has nothing to do with their lives. That framing is dangerously wrong. The Arctic is warming at roughly 4 times the global average rate. As the ice retreats, new shipping routes open, new fishing grounds become accessible, and new resource extraction becomes economically viable, all simultaneously. The region is transitioning from an inaccessible buffer zone into a contested operational environment faster than most governments have adjusted their thinking. NATO has been scrambling to update its Arctic strategy. The alliance conducted its largest Arctic military exercises in decades in recent years, explicitly naming the High North as a priority theater. But exercises are not infrastructure. And infrastructure, ports, runways, radar arrays, submarine cables, takes years to build in Arctic conditions. The window for positioning is closing, and every power involved knows it. What makes Greenland specifically the likely flashpoint, rather than, say, the Svalbard archipelago or Canada's Arctic islands? It comes down to geometry. Pull up a polar projection map, the kind that shows the Earth as it actually looks from above the North Pole, and trace the arc of shortest-distance flight paths between every major nuclear power. The United States, Russia, China. All of them. Every path converges over the Arctic. And Greenland, sitting at the geographic midpoint between the North American and Eurasian continents, is positioned to observe, intercept, or complicate anything moving through that space. There is no equivalent piece of real estate on the planet for the specific purpose of Arctic domain awareness. Losing it, or watching a rival gain access to it, would not be a setback. It would be a strategic catastrophe. The Inuit communities who have lived on this island for thousands of years did not ask to be at the center of 21st-century great power competition. They have navigated cycles of colonization, forced resettlement, environmental transformation, and political marginalization with a resilience that rarely gets the documentary treatment it deserves. The decisions being made in Washington, Beijing, and Moscow about Greenland's strategic future are decisions being made about people's homes, fishing grounds, and the land their ancestors have occupied since long before any European drew a map of the place. That tension between the lived reality of 57,000 people and the abstract strategic calculations of nuclear-armed states is not a footnote. It is the moral core of the entire story. By now, you understand something that wasn't obvious when you pressed play. Greenland is not a punchline about a real estate deal. It is not a simple story about climate change opening up new shipping lanes. It is the geographic pivot point around which the next era of great power competition will rotate. The map you grew up with lied to you about its size, its location, and its importance. The polar projection tells the truth. Greenland sits exactly where the world's most powerful militaries must pass if they ever intend to threaten each other at range. And in a world where that threat is no longer theoretical, the island's future, who controls it, who influences it, who builds on it, matters more than almost any other territorial question on Earth. So the first hours of a Third World War would not begin in the South China Sea. They would not begin in Eastern Europe. They would begin with a radar return over the Greenland ice sheet, a decision made in a hardened command center, and a scramble that the rest of the world would not understand until it was already too late to ask why nobody had been paying attention. If this changed the way you see the Arctic, and honestly, if it didn't, watch it again, drop a comment below answering this question. Do you think Greenland will declare independence within the next 20 years? The answer shapes everything. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing the world through maps that actually tell the truth. Like this video if it made you look at the globe differently. And check the link in the description. There's more on Arctic geopolitics you genuinely won't find anywhere else.